in a world where we have cars that drive themselves potentially, you know, there's going to be an awful lot that government will need to do to get ready for that evolution in technology. So, you know, and traditionally you don't think of government being, you know, sort of in lockstep with where private industry is innovating. So, you know, where are we today with government in regulation and setting standards around the future technology? Maybe you can lead us off there.
Yeah, there are actually quite some things that we should probably mention here. It's a very good question. Let's see, in this particular case with self-driving vehicles, as autonomous vehicles are also called every once in a while, it seems to be that in some places actually government is jumping ahead of the industry. So definitely we need to mention Nevada here, and maybe some of you are familiar with the recent initiatives and proceedings in the state of Nevada. And then they actually issued the first license plate for an autonomous vehicle about a month ago, something like this. And in fact, as of March 1st, there's regulation actually in effect in Nevada that regulates autonomous vehicles. And now you can look at it from two different angles, at least, probably even more. And Nevada is a very good example for other states as well, but we need to say that Nevada is probably the most advanced. There's currently no specific regulation for automated vehicles on a federal level. But in Nevada, they issued these license plates, but for testing only. So it's really something where you need to say, okay, it's for testing of automated vehicles on Nevada highways, and now they're regulated. Question is, was it already regulated before or not? And so California, at least at some point, took an approach to this topic and said, well, automated vehicles for testing have been legal in California forever and will also be going forward. So what's the big deal? Now, the question obviously is what happens after the testing. And then there's obviously the certification of production vehicles, and then obviously subsequently operation of automated vehicles in consumers' hand. And this is where Nevada has definitely some good thoughts and a good approach to regulating this as well. However, it's not being publicly regulated in such a term that you could actually apply for a license plate for a production vehicle that is self-driving. I want to say in this particular case, and that applies certainly to Nevada and also now some other states, we definitely want to mention again California, Florida, New Jersey, New York, Texas are looking at very similar approaches. It helps a lot actually to frame the topic for researchers and even more obviously in the end vehicle manufacturers and suppliers to understand what the playing field is going to look like once they are going to release those vehicles to the market. And I think in this particular case, we should be relatively thankful that things seem to be happening in parallel, which is not always the case.
Jason, for you, going back to the discussion on powering the car of tomorrow, and you know, we did a pretty deep dive on the electric vehicle, but Better Place has a kind of a very holistic approach to what you know, fueling the car of tomorrow might look like, and taking, you know, how do we talked about how do we make the electric vehicle the primary car, or how do we take away that fear of traveling longer distances. So maybe you can give us a little bit of insight in the way Better Place is looking at the solution.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to continue on what we've discussed in the previous panel, where we spoke about a lot of challenges and concerns. I think that the fundamental reason why electric vehicles are inevitable in the long term is that marginal mile price. I think Jeet or others mentioned that it is already better and cheaper today to drive a mile on electricity than it is on any kind of other fuel. Now, that is fundamental, because when those things happen, it's the same thing as when music went from CD or carbon format to electrons. Once that happens, there's no way that you can really stop inevitability. It's just a question of partnerships, time, and other things. So the transition is inevitable, but you have to ask yourself, why, if it's possible today, why aren't everybody in this room driving an electric car? How many of you driving today an electric car? Own one? Okay? How many of you have ever test driven one? Okay, now this is good. You know, I started 4 years ago. People would laugh when I'd ask that question. But it's the same question I ask when I go to talk in colleges. You ask first your students, how many of them have ever bought a CD? And they won't know what a CD is. You get no one. You ask the fourth year. We're talking about 4-year difference. They'd laugh for the other reason, because there's no way that they haven't bought a CD. And if I had to ask you, have you ever bought a CD in your life? Of course, has anybody not bought a CD? Okay, so again, but you ask first-year colleges, they won't know what it is. So that transition is happening. But you're going to have to solve for the two key issues, which is cost and range. And once you solve for cost and range, is what the business model that we talk about has done, and we spoke about the difference between Europe, financing. So we're going to have different segments that we're targeting in the early days. Tesla's going to do very well selling to people that don't mind paying that extra thing to get all the range of fuel in their vehicle day one, end to end. We're targeting a very different segment, the 25 to 40-year-old professionals that can't afford to have 2 or 3 cars like me. But these people need fuel that's coming to their car at home all the time, and on the occasional need where they have to go further than what they need, they can get refueled in less time than it takes them to fill up a tank of gas. Unless you can do both those things together, you will not get to that mass adoption market. And that is a very important thing, because we look at this, we try to look at this chasm as crossing this chasm. You'll cross a chasm on 1% of the early adopters, but you'll never cross the chasm, because gasoline is pretty efficient and pretty good as a product. Until you beat that product, Clay Christensen doesn't come to life. So to answer your question, long term, we will be driving 99% of the time with our EV, just filling up itself. You'll drive into your garage, inductive charging, you'll drive to the mall, wherever you stop, you won't care about it. But when you do need that longer trip, you will have the ability to switch out that battery, and you won't care about the battery because you don't own it. It's part of the grid, the network, and you look at that as like you would, you don't have to own the cell tower that you speak on when you talk on your iPhone.
Means if you make a decision to purchase a vehicle, you basically think consciously or subconsciously about all these things you might be doing within the next 3, 4, maybe 5 years. And that is a problem that many people say, ooh, maybe not this time, maybe next time that they purchase an electric vehicle. And the statistics go, and you basically said that we go to the shopping mall, we go to work and everything, so 50% of all vehicles in the United States drive less than, I guess, 20 miles or something like this every day, and 80% of all vehicles drive less than 40 miles every day, so therefore everyone should be happy with a 100-mile battery electric vehicle range. Turns out that not everyone purchased these vehicles, and we spend a lot of research dollars and effort and whatnot to basically cover this gap, which is something between 40 and maybe 300 miles or so. The point there is, and that's the second thing I wanted to say, that we might end up with a pretty heavy vehicle with a huge battery that enables these 300 miles, takes away range anxiety completely. But it's a very heavy vehicle unless we do battery swapping or a fossil fuel powered range extender, which is a different conversation, obviously. But if you just think about a very heavy vehicle just for these 1% of all use cases, then basically your electric vehicle is as good as an SUV with all-wheel drive and 7 seats that you don't really need every day. But sometime within those 3 to 5 years time span you own this vehicle, you might. And so that's really something that we as researchers and product developers and also as consumers need to understand, I guess, how all these mechanisms work, making a vehicle choice. And this is definitely something where if you have more flexibility with your energy storage, it's a great thing.
Jason, you were shaking your head. Is that agreement or disagreement there?
No, I agree that people won't want to carry 300-mile batteries. The same as, today, by the way, we can have a battery that lasts us a week on these. Mm-hmm. Everybody probably would want that, but no one would be willing to pay for it. Because we got a usage that we can put it in at night and fill it up, and as long as it fits us for the day. So my contention is, even when we do have a 300-mile battery, the 100-mile battery or the 150-mile battery that would be in a network system would be so much cheaper and more convenient that, so I'm agreeing with his disagreement that people wouldn't want to carry that 300-mile battery.
Fair enough.
I agree. Yeah.
We'll find ways to argue later.
Maybe switching gears, from electric vehicles. And this question goes to maybe starting off with Mike, and looking at the connected car, and really beginning to think of the car as another module on your smart network, much like an iPhone. I can envision, what will Apple do to adjust their stores if they're selling an iCar? That's an interesting thought. But when you think of the business models that may emerge when you connect mobility, social networks with a car that may have some level of autonomous driving, what's coming there, Mike? Maybe you can share with us.
Sure. I'll give you my 2 cents. So, yeah, a car is a great accessory for your iPhone. Works out great. But the big piece that I want to put out there is that we built networks and we built infrastructures just to support communications and from a smartphone perspective. And the connected vehicle program that Sprint has put together has been designed to take the vehicle, and could be regular fuel-based vehicles or electric vehicles or some sort of hybrid, and to make them into really smartphones, mobile smartphones. And I think you're starting to see many of the same parallels. Like Simon's gave some great insights about the ARM processors, and when you look at ARM processors, there are throughout the vehicle and connected to sensors throughout there. The same ARM processors that are in phones that are inside the base stations throughout there. So there's a great connectivity in ecosystems. And I think you can kind of see even what Tanner was mentioning about earlier in his discussion. Look at the dashboard and the interface on that. The ability to move and migrate and change those upon demand is right there and available today. So just like you have a widget that might be on your smartphone, you have widgets and the ability to customize directly into the vehicle. So we're starting to see this existing. It's not future, it's now. So I love to see how these practical applications are coming in. And so part of this, and you mentioned social media, so part of this evolution and platform that's needed to support that is to take standards-based approaches using, BMW started with the next generation telecommunication patterns that are out there, the NTGPs, and the ability to have a standards-based communication format to make that happen. Now you have the applications that have the ability to tie in social networking to really make things available, like Facebook, Twitter, and other applications for infotainment that bring that in a user-acceptable way that doesn't compromise the driving or the driver to make that happen. And the platform needs to be smart enough to make that happen. So I think we're starting to see this happening in the now, right? Future. When we start to look at our connected plug-in vehicles that are out there, the ability to have anonymous analytics that happens in the network layer, to know what the charging capacity is of the vehicle at any given time, to know and anticipate where that vehicle is going to need to charge, and be able to queue up demand for that, I think is a really big future capability. And that all comes back to big data needs and the infrastructure to take that big data up and be able to do the analytics in an anonymous fashion, so we don't compromise, security, and we don't, our credentials and whatnot. So this is out there, and I think you'd start to tie these pieces in, and we really are starting to look at some great ways to look at the vehicle itself being part of the network, right, and making it happen. So I think that's where we're starting to see the next generation from a platform or a connected vehicle program.
My parents in Israel got the first Renault Fluence, Better Place and Renault partner, great car, with Oscar. It's an OS car, fully communication enabled, fully value-added services. And today in Israel, hundreds of these cars, and in Denmark and in Europe, are running around, all communication enabled. And my mom, who thought she'd be the last person to drive that car, I had to force her to do it. She's been driving since January 26, so we're almost 5 months since then, put on 3,000 miles on this car. and she's got 3 of those calls from the customer care to tell her, listen, you're cutting short, you've got about 5% range. She boasts that she brings the car down to 1% because she's got that confidence, while my dad will never drive below 20%. So all those things, I was joking about disagreeing, I agree with you 100%. Those are happening. They have their local version of the newspaper in the car today in that Oscar. They have the Waze, which is the traffic navigation. It's early, there's a lot of things, but those cars are now being upgraded through the wire. So a partner will come, and then Renault has to say, okay, we're batching all these applications, and it has become our 4th device after the PC, the mobile phone, the tablet, and each one of these, and the car becomes kind of that 4th mobile device that has to have some customization to fit the usage of sitting in the car and safety and other things. But it's really happening today. So I think the speed is kind of like my skepticism when I got here in the 90s was, oh, this internet thing, you know, dial-up stuff is going to be useless. You know, I think I'm going to be even more surprised about the speed in this generation.
Maybe an additional thought, and it's really more an observation that I have in talking to many of these car companies and content providers and infrastructure providers. Sometimes I wonder, why is there all this excitement around connected services in the automobile and applications in the car, maybe an app store and whatnot. And great, Jason, that you mentioned we are looking now at the 4th device, or we can also look at it like, okay, we have something in our office, on desk, and we have something at home, and we have something on the go on our smartphones. Now, why is there this excitement about the automobile? Because definitely until, I want to say like 3 or 5 years ago maximum, typically I heard in the automotive and then consumer electronics industry, you know what, the sales volume in the automotive industry is so small compared to the mobile electronics or consumer electronics. But many experts seem to agree that what is going to be used in the car might define what we're going to be using everywhere else. Because the automobile is still a relatively restricted environment, because the car manufacturers basically say what's in and what is not. And also, due to distraction, all of these things, we don't really have that much time to play around with different apps. Does this work? Does that work? So it has to work. And therefore, what's going to be working in the car might define, maybe revolutionize what we're using in the office, what we're using at home, what we're using on our smartphone somewhere. And that's, I think, not to underestimate, and I think in particular interesting for this area where we're here today.
Absolutely.